standing there looking at him, crying, just saying, thank you, thank you.
I just wanted to help my friend in any way I could.
It's not always about coming first. Sometimes it's about finishing well.
Without her, I'm not sure I would even be here right now. She's given up so much. She's my rock.
Feel normal and to just be like a good, healthy mum for my son.
I owe my life to this man. His sacrifice is the reason I'm here today. If I had to, I would jump back in front of that car again to save his life.
He will be remembered for decades to come because he laid down his life to save us.
Wow, no one hit hard. No one hit the birthday. All buildings just came apart. Holy smoke.
Well, happy Easter, everyone, and welcome to those who are listening online today. Today's message is called The Equalizer. The Equalizer. Do you know, this is such a fantastic day to be celebrating Jesus and Jesus being alive. Jesus is alive. And when we say that as a claim and as a term, we're not just saying that Jesus is alive, we are saying that he has risen and risen indeed. Jesus did not just conquer death. If he became alive, he would have had to die again. But Jesus conquered death and the grave. And because Jesus conquered death and the grave, he is risen indeed. And because he is risen indeed, it means death has no hold on you. That you can come to death, but you have got life the other side. There is something that Jesus has brought through for you. I remember when I was teaching in Uganda many years back, and we were teaching some sports to some kids who had been caught up in some civil war conflicts. And they asked me to bring a whole village together and teach them sport on one particular day. And on that particular day, we decided to teach them a game of rounders. So we got about 72 aside game of rounders going on, which was not easy to organise. It's easier to organise Renewal on a Sunday than it was for that game of rounders. And we started this game, and I just remember putting everyone in their right places and bowling the first bowl to a young lad who just stood there with his bat, knees knocking, trembling away. And this ball came towards him, and he went, whop! And he hit it, and he just stood there. Now, you know what the game of rounders is all about. You have to try and get round all of the bases. So he stood there smiling, thinking, probably, great, I've got rid of that nasty ball that's gone away. And I said to him, run. And he stood there smiling at me. And I said, run. And he stood there smiling. And at the top of my voice, I went, run. The whole place ran. Everybody on every base ran. The whole village started running in all sorts of different directions. It was madness. But you know something? There was life to it. In a place that had seen darkness and death and seen great pain and sorrow, suddenly life has sprung up. You see, when we say Jesus is alive, it's not just breathtaking, it's life-giving. It goes beyond just taking your breath away. It fills you with great life. So if you haven't heard, Jesus is alive. It's great life. Now, this week, I've received some wonderful emails. Thank you very much. See, it works. Somebody sent me an email with just this statement in the middle of it. And they said, I have never felt so alive since I have now found Jesus. Isn't that incredible? Somebody here has never felt so alive since they have found Jesus. A second email came to me and said, this is the best I've been in years. And I want to say a thank you to all of Renewal for making this a place where I could feel at home, where I can be welcomed, for making this a place where I could come as I am, and yet now I have found that my life is changing for the better. These are wonderful emails, and I want to say thank you, because that's what we're all about. This is what Resurrection Sunday is all about. It's about life. It's about Jesus being alive. Now, the Equalizer, if you can recall all the way back into the 1980s, back in the day, was a TV show that has now been remade into a movie. But the original TV show starred an American actor called Edward Woodward. And there used to be a famous joke that would go around saying, what do you call a man with 3 planks on his head? Ed Wood. Okay, and that would be the joke. And then people would say, what do you call a man with 4 planks on his head? I don't know, but Edward Wood. You know, and then it would carry on, and they would do all sorts of things. But he starred in this show called The Equalizer. And The Equalizer was about an intelligence agent he was retired, but was using all of his skills to bring justice to things that were unfair. And to bring an equaling of it. It was like we would level this up. We would level the playing field where there was injustice. Now, you may have caught it recently because it's been remade into a movie with the actor I think I most look like. And that's Denzel Washington. Apart from the obvious, there you go. Apart from the obvious, which he's about 20 years older than me. But this whole program or this film is about leveling up what is unfair. Jesus is the equalizer. He has gone before us and he goes the extra mile, because when you come to a crime scene, they often put down tape which says, do not cross. And they put it down into a place because something has happened. But Jesus crossed the barrier. He crossed through that seal. The seal that was said that no human life could cross. And he took our place and brought through that equaling of what death and the victory of overcoming death was all about. It is an equalizer, as Jesus has brought us now life. There was this moment that Jesus pointed to the temple in Jerusalem, this magnificent temple. It had first been built by Solomon, and then it had been destroyed through all the exiles of the different empires. And then Nehemiah and a many load of people were called to go and rebuild it back again. And they rebuilt the second temple. And then Herod the Great in Jesus' time, he decided that he's going to refurbish it and make it the most special place that was ever constructed. So he was doing these magnificent facades to it and all these great edifices. And the temple was looking incredible. And it was taking 5 decades to restore. And Jesus comes along and Jesus says, see this magnificent temple? The imperial, the grandiose structure that is here, it's going to be demolished. All of this is going to come down, and in 3 days, I'm going to rebuild it. And the whole place went, Jesus, you are mad, or you're very dangerous. By the way, I do think Jesus is dangerous, because he's going to demand your life, your soul, your all. And so Jesus is dangerous, but at the same time, they were saying, you're mad. This has taken 5 decades. How can somebody like you just put it back together in 3 days? But Jesus was doing something different, wasn't he? He was not saying, look at the building. God is not just in the buildings. God is going to come in something different. He is coming into a different place. In fact, my body, he's saying, is now going to be a temple. And this is going to get destroyed and demolished and torn apart and broken down. But don't worry, I'm coming back in 3 days' time. And I'm going to be remade, renewed. I'm going to be reconstructed. And I'm going to bring something which is an access to God that everybody's been dreaming about. And so Jesus started to take this whole thing of what it would mean to get into relationship with God, the access to God. He brought it on himself. He was not only saying that his body was the temple, but he was saying, I am now the high priest. Because I'm going to be the one who steps into the barriers that no one else is allowed to step into. And I'm going to bring a connection between mankind and God. Not only am I going to be the high priest, but in the temple itself, there is always a sacrifice. And that sacrifice is something innocent, something pure and blameless. And that sacrifice is going to be shed so that actually all of sin, it will be paid for. And I'm going to be the temple, the high priest, but I'm also going to be the sacrifice that is shed. And Jesus says all these things are now going to be fulfilled all in me, all through this time. And that's what we want to teach you about Easter, that our theme of sacrifice, like the Equalizer, when Denzel Washington comes into that movie, sometimes he doesn't have to get involved, but he sees something that's wrong, and he's got the skills to be able to make it all right again. And Jesus could have stayed in heaven. He could have stayed out of the way, but he didn't. He says, I'm the one who can do something about it. In fact, I am the only one who can do something about this. So Jesus died once for you, for everyone, forever. Because he'll never have to do it again. Now, we've been taking some of these verses and words from our theme, sacrifice, from Hebrews chapter 9. And I just want to talk through just so you gather the whole understanding of sacrifice to resurrection, what this means, just a few verses, because I think Hebrews 9 just encapsulates it the best. And it starts in verse 22, which Andy unpacked so beautifully on Good Friday, and you'll be able to catch that message online if you missed it. But in verse 24, it says this: For Christ has entered not into holy places made with hands. So think about the temple, what Jesus has just been teaching. Okay? This is not into a place made with hands, which are copies of the true thing. God was trying to institute something on earth that would be a way for people to get to God again, because that relationship had been broken. And he says, those are the copies of the true things, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. Many people say, what was Jesus doing between Friday and Sunday? You know, if he died first thing in, kind of in Friday morning and was resurrected 3 days later, what was happening in between? Here's what was happening. When Jesus gave up his spirit, when he announced those words on the cross, it is finished, he went straight into heaven. He went into heaven because there was something that needed cleaning up in heaven. And people saying, whoa, just a second, but isn't heaven a perfect place? Because isn't that where God is and God was? In Colossians chapter 1, it said that Jesus, through his sacrifice, was reconciling all things to himself in heaven and on earth. When Jesus died on the cross, what he did was the blood, he came before the Father, straight into heaven and went, see, I've done it. I've done it. No more will mankind not be able to get to God anymore. Now I've done it. And I'm cleaning up heaven because the first rebellion happened in heaven. Satan and his angels rebelled against heaven and it needed cleaning up. So Jesus goes back in because remember, Jesus is outside of time, so it's no longer past, present, and future. Jesus steps back into eternity and says, I'm paying for all of the past. Everything in heaven and on earth is now completely reconciled in me. And so that's why he steps into that place. And from that place, as he starts to bring all of the cleanup, it then goes on to say, nor was it, because he appears in God's presence on our behalf, nor was it to offer himself repeatedly as the high priest enters the holy places every year, with blood not his own. And that's verse 25 there. So Jesus, as high priest, this is what the high priest would do. The high priest was one man from one family, in one tribe, which was the Levites, from one nation to represent all of humanity, and that's who he was. He was chosen as one. There was only one at any other point on earth. There was one high priest. And that high priest, on one day of the year, which would have been this day around the Passover festival, on the Day of Atonement, that one man on that one day would only be allowed to come into this one place, the most holy place, and he could only enter by having blood shed into a basin. So he would have a sacrifice that paid for his own sin and for the sin of everybody, and he would be allowed to go into the most holy place to say, now God, forgive and atone for all of the sin of all of the people. And that's what he would do. Jesus, though, so on one day, one person, with one way, it was only ever been able to do once. But Jesus did this in heaven. He steps into the most holy place that nobody had been able to cross. And he steps as one man, the one chosen person, and he steps with the blood. And he steps once into heaven, and he never has to do it again. You see, what would happen, the high priest would have to come back the next year and do the same all over again. Look what it says in the next verse here. It would go on to say, for then he would have to suffer repeatedly since the foundation of the world. So Jesus suffered on the cross once. Once. And he did suffer, by the way. And in fact, I don't know why I've never seen it before, but this Easter for the first time, and I love it when the Bible comes alive again. This Easter, for the first time, I realized, do you know, nobody would have been flogged or scourged and crucified. Because flogging was a punishment in itself. So you didn't get flogged and then taken to the cross. You were flogged and then you were just, put back into society again. Jesus was the only one, as far as I can see, that was ever flogged and scourged and then crucified onto the cross. Now, people would have been beaten up and hit, but, there was a punishment given to Jesus and then crucifixion. And I think we seldom understand the impact of what Jesus went through. The depths of the suffering he went through, but he never has to suffer again. He went through all of that once. He not has to repeat it because since the foundation of the world, this is all Jesus needed to do. Not come back the next year and come back the next year. Jesus did this once, forever, for everyone. And so it then goes on to say, he has appeared once for all at the end of the ages to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. This is what happened. The earthly problem was sin. And Jesus dying on the cross sorts out the earthly problem. Okay? And then it goes on to say this from verse 27. And just as it is appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment. Now this is about a view of life. Remember? Easter Sunday is about Jesus being alive. It's life-giving. You have one life to live. Now, lots of people in today's world would believe that. But what the Bible is stating here is there is no reincarnation. There's no something else is going to come, kind of in a new form and you come back round. What the Bible is stating here is there is not a way to get right afterwards, saying you've got one life. One opportunity to receive Jesus in this life, right here and now. This is your opportunity. And it's appointed for us all to finish our life at some point. But then the Bible gives us something beautiful. And after. And after. Because now, because Jesus has crossed that line. So imagine if there would have been a do not cross crime scene put around the cross. Imagine there was a seal on the tomb. Imagine this was a place that nobody could cross, that nobody was allowed into, and yet Jesus broke through it. And because he's broke through it, there is now an after. There is life ever after. There is an eternal life. Because remember, Jesus sorted out the earthly problem by dying on the cross. Jesus died on the cross so that the earthly problem of sin would be defeated. But Jesus rose again so the eternal problem of death would be defeated. Now, the Bible then goes on from this into the final verse we're looking at today. And so Christ, and having been offered once to bear the sins of many, so fascinating. I keep looking in my Bible and seeing these little phrases from one to many keep springing up. It's not just about our strategies here at Renewal, that we want to see the whole mission and vision of the church, which started with one person, sprout to many people who are here today. But actually, this is the gospel message. Jesus died once. He offered himself once to bear the sins of many. But here's the next thing, and this is a very important thing. He will appear a second time. Not to deal with sin, because he's already done that on the cross. Not to deal with death, because he's already done that in resurrection. But he is coming back a second time to save those who are eagerly waiting for him. So that line, do not cross, has been broken by Jesus. And you can have confidence by believing in his name. You can pass through into the place where Jesus is if you should die at the appointed time. That is now your freedom. That is now your right. That is where Jesus has gone before you so that you can be there. Or he is coming back. He is coming back and he's going to gather you to himself. That's what's going to happen to all those who believe in Jesus. This is a second coming, a second time that Jesus will come back and bring life and bring his people all together. Now, this is what changed the early church and all of the early Christians more than anything else. You know, the early church didn't go, Jesus died for me. I can see it now in Isaiah, and I can read this bit in the Zechariah, and I can see how all the prophets and the Psalms, and Psalm 22 that so graphically predicts the prophecy of what Jesus was going to suffer on the cross. The disciples weren't going, oh, now I see. Jesus died on the cross. Don't worry about it. This is great. I've seen all the promises and the prophecies. They ran away. They were in great fear and dread. But it all changed when they saw Jesus resurrected. And that's what starts the church. It's not just a Pentecost moment. It's the resurrection. It's the resurrection that starts a new entity, because suddenly there's now a new covenant. Suddenly there is now a new way to live your life. And so those early Christians suddenly now were, their grief was turned to joy. Thomas was there saying, oh, I don't believe in this. I can't believe what's just happened. And next minute he's now looking at Jesus going, my Lord and my God. And so Jesus came back to them. And I'm always surprised that he didn't just turn back into Jerusalem, back into the temple. But what Jesus did do, and this is why I believe that the church existed from that moment onwards. When Jesus appeared, he appeared to personal encounters. To people now who would never deny Jesus again, by the way. And I wouldn't die for something that I didn't believe was true. And so if this was a made-up hoax, I wouldn't have given my life for it and suffered in the way those disciples did. But those disciples banked everything on Jesus coming back from the dead. Not that he died on the cross. They knew now that dying on the cross was a payment for sin, was a ransom for everything that we had done. But because Jesus is now Lord, because Jesus has now risen from the dead, the disciples were prepared to give their lives. And you can give your life to Jesus because he's done something for you. In fact, Jesus didn't even just die for you, he died as you. When you should have paid for your own life, Jesus took your place. And he died as you. But that in itself makes us connect back to God with a relationship to say, God, I want to say thank you for what you've done. But it's the resurrection that gives you power to live your life. So Jesus died on the cross to deal with the earthly problem of sin. Jesus rose from the dead to fix the eternal problem of death. But Jesus is coming again so that you have life forevermore. And that's what we believe is the central tenet of our belief in who Jesus is. That's what we want you at home to believe. That's what we want you, if you're here for the first time or as a guest, that's what we want you to believe, that Jesus died once for you, for everyone, forever, but Jesus rose again once for you, for everyone, forever. Now this is the point when Thomas comes back in and says, I couldn't believe this at first. I mean, I can believe in Jesus doing good things, and I can believe in all of his teachings, but to come back from the dead, I have to see it for myself. And Thomas stands in front of Jesus and says, I need some kind of evidence, or in front of all the disciples. And Jesus appears and says, Thomas, look at the scars here. Look at where the spear pierced my side. And then he says these words to Thomas. He says, Thomas, now that you have seen me, you believe. But there are those, and this includes us, who have never seen me with their eyes, but have believed in me with their hearts, and they will be blessed even more. And I do want to say to you, do you feel blessed this Easter? Are you blessed this Easter? Blessed means not just being happy in your circumstances. It means all of the goodness of God just comes through your life. It means all of the peace and the joy and the hope that only God offers, all of that comes into your life. Imagine if a teenager leaves to go to university, and in most houses, they would have their own bedroom. And they would leave that bedroom behind and they go off to university. And maybe brothers and sisters in the house get a little bit like, oh, that bedroom could be mine. Kind of all of like that. And they start to think about that. Maybe a mum would walk into that bedroom and want it just to stay as they are because there's something missing now. Something that's gone. Imagine the person you most love in the world who's no longer with you for whatever reason. Maybe you've lost them in grief and bereavement, or maybe there's a separation. Me and my brother live thousands and thousands of miles apart. He lives in Washington, D.C. Imagine there's that separation, but the doorbell rings, and you go to open the door, and they're on the doorstep. Stood on the doorstep. Imagine how you would feel. Imagine those early disciples when Jesus just appeared before them again. And he was just stood in front of them. Somebody once said to me, why can't they find Jesus' tomb then? Why can't they find where it actually was? If you went to Israel, people will speculate and they'll say, this is the place, or no, this is it. And they kind of make all those different claims, but actually nobody knows. Do you know what? If Jesus was alive, why would you go back to the tomb? Why would you go back to a place where they are no longer there anymore? The mum who has lost somebody to university, they go back to that place. Why in the bedroom? Because they're missing. But the disciples and you now have Jesus forever. Forever. You don't have to go back to the tomb. That's why 30 years later, when the Gospels were being written, nobody was bothered about a gravestone or a cemetery or a tomb. Why? Because Jesus was alive. They had him forever. Once for you, for everyone, forever. Death is now equalized. Let's pray. And maybe you're here in this room today, or maybe you're listening online, and we want the power of resurrection to make your life alive. I want you to know the same feelings as some people who have been writing in this week to say, I've never felt more alive. In Philippians chapter 3, actually, Paul writes and says this, I want to know him. And we want you not to just know about Jesus, we want you to know him. Then Paul goes on to say, and I want to know the power of his resurrection. Because it's not just enough to know him, it's got to work out in your life too. There is the power of the resurrection that works out in your life. And then Paul goes on to say, and I want to know his sufferings. Why? Because then you can live like him, and you're prepared to give your whole life to him. If you're listening online or here in our auditorium, Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday is a great day to give your life to Jesus. And you could pray a prayer that would go something like this. Lord Jesus, I want to know you. I believe that in the sacrifice that you gave for me, that you were the perfect sacrifice that died on the cross in my place. I accept that I have done things in my life that I regret, that I believe are wrong. And I pray for your forgiveness because you have now dealt on the cross with all of my sin. But I pray because of your resurrection, you would now give me life and life forevermore. Come and live inside of my life, into my heart, and give me that resurrection power so that I can live with you, not only now, but for eternity. And by the power of your Holy Spirit, I want to know you, to know your sufferings, to know what it's like to live as you live. And I pray that you would give me the power to do so. And we ask all these things in Jesus' mighty name. Amen. If you've prayed that for the first time online, we would love you to write in and tell us that you've made that decision. If you're here in the room today, then afterwards the team will lead you to some of the next steps that you can take to be able to just make good on that prayer and just connect a little bit closer with us. Remember, Jesus is the equalizer. He has not only paid that price for death, but he went even further. And he brought everything into a place where now you and God can be together both now and forever. God bless you this Easter.